Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes Israel-Hamas war tests China's Middle East strategy. Iran and Israel, from allies to arch-enemies, how did they get here? U.S. nuclear sub offers show of force in the Middle East. Live updates: Israeli warplanes hit refugee camps in Gaza while UN agencies call siege an outrage. India once was a strong ally of Palestine. What changed? Israel-Hamas war tests China's Middle East strategy. Yahoo! The Israel-Hamas war is posing the sternest test yet of President Xi Jinping's Middle East strategy that to date has been centered around the concept of balanced diplomacy. Growing pro-Palestinian sentiment in China and the country's historic sympathies in the region suggest that if Xi is forced off the impartiality road, he will side with the Palestinians over the Israelis. Beijing's overall strategic vision for the Middle East is one in which U.S. influence is significantly reduced while China's is significantly enhanced. Beijing seeks to promote multi-alignment through what is described in Chinese government documents as balanced diplomacy and positive balancing. Balanced diplomacy entails not taking sides in various conflicts including the Israeli-Palestinian one and not making any enemies. Positive balancing centers on pursuing closer cooperation with one regional power, say Iran, in the belief that this will incentivize others, for example, Arab Gulf countries, to follow suit. Iran and Israel, from allies to arch-enemies, how did they get here? Al Jazeera. Iran and Israel have a long and complex history of relations that have fluctuated over the years. Under the Pahlavi dynasty, Iran was the second Muslim-majority country to recognize Israel after its establishment in 1948. However, ties deteriorated after Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the country's oil industry, severing ties with Israel and the West. Following the overthrow of the Shah in 1979, Iran cut off all ties with Israel and adopted an aggressive position on the Palestinian issue to assert itself as a leader in the Islamic world. Tehran now supports a network of political and armed groups across the region, who view Israel as a major enemy. The enmity between the two nations has also extended to a shadow war of sabotage attacks and cyber warfare. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has further strained relations between Iran and Israel. Iran has been one of the most vocal critics of Israel's bombardment of Gaza and has warned that the war could spread beyond the territory. Israel has escalated attacks in Lebanon and Syria, where Iran wields considerable influence. The two nations are now engaged in a low-level war for dominance and power in the region. Despite efforts by the U.S. to mediate a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, any prospect of normalization between Tel Aviv and Riyadh has been put on hold due to Israel's actions in Gaza. Overall, the relationship between Iran and Israel is characterized by deep-seated enmity and rivalry. Iran's staunch anti-Israel foreign policy and support for Palestinian groups, combined with Israel's security concerns and opposition to Iran's regional influence, have created a volatile and hostile dynamic between the two nations. There are currently no signs of this changing. U.S. nuclear sub offers show of force in the Middle East. Al Jazeera. The U.S. Navy has deployed a guided missile submarine to the Middle East in an apparent show of force amid the Israel-Hamas war. The posting was revealed by the U.S. military in a statement on social media. The submarine is capable of launching nuclear missiles. Since the war broke out, the U.S. has moved significant military assets to the region, including 2 aircraft carriers and fighter aircraft. It has also deployed around 1,000 soldiers and engaged Special Operations Commandos to advise the Israeli military. The U.S. has also bolstered the defenses of its Gulf allies with missile defense systems. Live updates: Israeli warplanes hit refugee camps in Gaza while UN agencies call siege an outrage. Associated Press. Israeli airstrikes have targeted 2 refugee camps in the central Gaza Strip, killing dozens of people, as the U.S. continues to press for a humanitarian pause in the violence. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is currently in the region meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. The Palestinian death toll in the Israel-Hamas war has now surpassed 9,700, with more than 4,000 of them being children and minors. In the occupied West Bank, more than 140 Palestinians have been killed in violence and Israeli raids. More than 1,400 people in Israel have also been killed, most of them in the October 7 Hamas attack that started the fighting, and 242 hostages were taken from Israel into Gaza by the militant group. Around 1,100 people have left the Gaza Strip since Wednesday under an apparent agreement between the U.S., Egypt, Israel and Qatar. India once was a strong ally of Palestine. What changed? Diplomat. India's recent pro-Israel stance in the ongoing Gaza conflict has raised questions about its foreign policy and relationship with Palestine. While India has historically supported Palestine, its ties with Israel have grown stronger in recent years, with India now being one of Israel's largest arms buyers. This shift in position can be attributed to several factors, including the emergence of Hindu nationalism in India, the government's election agenda, and its desire to maintain good relations with the United States. Additionally, India's support for Israel is driven by its counter-terrorism perspective, viewing Israel's actions as a counter-terrorism operation. However, not all Indians support Israel's actions, and there are concerns about the rise of Islamophobia and the vilification of Muslims in India. The Indian government's support for Israel is seen as part of its anti-Islamic political agenda. India's stance could also impact its relationships with Middle Eastern nations, especially if they align themselves with the Palestinian cause. India will seek to assure its Arab partners that its pro-Israel position does not represent an abandonment of the Palestinian cause and that it remains committed to it. India is also wary of China's growing influence in the Middle East and wants to maintain its own influence in the region. Overall, India's support for Israel is driven by a combination of factors, including its own strategic interests, its relationship with the United States, and its domestic political agenda. However, there are concerns about the rise of Islamophobia and Hindu nationalism in India and the impact this has on its foreign policy and relationships in the Middle East. Blinken wraps up frantic Mideast tour with tepid, if any, support for pauses in Gaza fighting. Associated Press. U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has made limited progress in his diplomatic efforts in the Middle East aimed at building a regional consensus on how to ease civilian suffering in Gaza as Israel escalates its war against Hamas. Blinken hopes that temporary pauses in the fighting will allow for the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza and the release of hostages taken by Hamas, as well as prevent the conflict from spreading regionally. However, Israel has rejected the idea of pauses, whilst Arab and Muslim nations are demanding an immediate ceasefire as the number of Palestinian civilian casualties rises. Israel latest, Blinken in Turkey on latest leg of Mideast tour. Yahoo! Israeli troops have encircled Gaza City and effectively cut off the northern part of the Gaza Strip from the south, Israel's military said. Internet blackouts keep hitting Gaza. Here's what to know. Washington Post. Gaza residents have experienced a number of communications blackouts, with the latest one occurring over the weekend. During this time, residents were unable to access the internet, make any phone calls, or use landline telephone networks. Aid groups have highlighted the fact that Palestinians were unable to contact emergency services during the blackouts. According to Alp Tokayer, the director of cybersecurity monitoring group NetBlocks, internet connectivity in Gaza has gradually worsened since the conflict began in October. There have been 3 blackouts in total, the most recent one lasting several hours. Tokayer believes that the blackouts are likely to be due to technical disruption rather than damage from military strikes. The blackouts have meant that Gazans are unable to communicate with the outside world, and are preventing journalists from reporting on the situation in the territory. The blackouts are causing panic and distress among the civilian population, according to the head of UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, who warned of a breakdown in civil order. Gaza's Christians fear for survival amid war. BBC. Christians in Gaza are struggling to cope with the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. The small Christian community, numbering around 1,000, had taken refuge in churches, believing they would be safe there. However, an Israeli airstrike on the Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrius shattered this illusion and shattered the sense of security the Christians had within the church. In addition, the Christian community has also criticized the public comments of church leaders concerning the war, stating that they have prioritized domestic British ecumenical and political considerations over the recognition of Palestinian rights. U.S. top diplomat Blinken meets Turkish FM for tough talks on Israel-Gaza war. Al Jazeera. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with his Turkish counterpart in Ankara as part of his tour of the Middle East to ease tensions over the Israel-Hamas war. Blinken met with Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan for 2.5 hours on Monday but was not greeted by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Blinken's tour follows meetings with Arab leaders over the weekend, during which he faced frustration over the U.S.'s support for Israel. Turkey has been among the most vocal critics of Israel since the war broke out and last month recalled its ambassador from Tel Aviv. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Six, your resident observer from the six-dimensional world, bringing you the latest news from the Middle East. Today, we've covered a wide range of topics, from China's Middle East strategy to the complex history between Iran and Israel, India's shifting stance on Palestine, and the ongoing efforts of the U.S. to mediate in the Israel-Hamas war. Let's start with China's Middle East strategy. President Xi Jinping has been pursuing a policy of balanced diplomacy, which aims to reduce U.S. influence in the region while increasing China's own. However, the growing pro-Palestinian sentiment in China and the country's historic sympathies in the region may force Xi to take sides in the Israel-Hamas conflict. This could have significant implications for China's overall strategic vision for the Middle East. Speaking of the Israel-Hamas conflict, the relationship between Iran and Israel has a long and complex history. From allies to archenemies, these two nations have been engaged in a shadow war of attacks and cyber warfare. The ongoing conflict in Gaza has further strained their relations, and there are no signs of this changing anytime soon. Meanwhile, the U.S. has deployed a guided missile submarine to the Middle East, adding to its significant military presence in the region. The U.S. has also been trying to mediate a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but any prospect of normalization between the two countries has been put on hold due to Israel's actions in Gaza. India's recent pro-Israel stance in the Gaza conflict has raised questions about its foreign policy and relationship with Palestine. While India has historically supported Palestine, its ties with Israel have grown stronger in recent years. This shift in position can be attributed to several factors, including the emergence of Hindu nationalism, the government's election agenda, and its desire to maintain good relations with the United States. However, there are concerns about the rise of Islamophobia in India and the impact this has on its foreign policy and relationships in the Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been making diplomatic efforts to ease civilian suffering in Gaza and prevent the conflict from spreading regionally. However, his progress has been limited, with Israel rejecting the idea of pauses in the fighting and Arab and Muslim nations demanding an immediate ceasefire. Lastly, Gaza residents have been experiencing internet blackouts, preventing them from accessing the outside world and causing panic and distress among the civilian population. Aid groups have raised concerns about the inability to contact emergency services during these blackouts. In conclusion, the Israel-Hamas war continues to test the strategies and relationships of countries around the world. It's a complex and volatile situation with no easy solutions. As always, I encourage you, my dear viewers, to share your thoughts and questions. What are your thoughts on China's Middle East strategy, the US's role in mediating the conflict, or any other topic we've covered today? Let's engage in a lively discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.